Good afternoon and welcome to the 34th webinar in IWFM's Turbulent Time series, which focuses on the new role of the Building Safety Manager. I am Sophie Hooper. I'm the Head of Policy at IWFM and I will be your host for today. So far in the series, we have explored a wide range of subjects impacting on workplace and facilities management, some COVID related, some talking about the future of work, sustainability and many more. After our last webinar on the draft Building Safety Bill in October, we received many requests to return to the Building Safety Manager role and to focus on the actual competences, the role, expected relationships with other existing roles, and the pathway towards becoming a BSM. What do people need to be able to do the role? So by way of a short introduction, since the Grenfell tragedy, IWFM have been working to help build a new building safety regime, and our big three drivers for this engagement are to embed safety for safe homes and spaces for people, to help drive a culture change that would help create a better FM work environment through professionalising roles and through the maintenance of the golden thread of information throughout the life cycle of a building, and because the Building Safety Manager would be the first statutory role in the FM space. Now in July, the draft Building Safety Bill confirmed that to be able to do the BSM role, specific competences will need to be evidenced to the building safety regulator to be able to assume the role. So as part of this discussion, we will not just cover the competences, we will also talk about how to evidence them in the future, and we'll be talking about what would be seen as deemed to comply. I am joined by three guests, and I've had the pleasure of working with them all over the last 3 years. And together we will only go through questions, so please keep on sending them in. We've received a few in advance of this. There's no presentation other than background slides, and there will be some supporting slides for some of the discussion, but hopefully listeners will walk away with a greater insight on what is coming down the line by way of our responses to your questions. So Rob, I'm going to ask you and the other panel members to briefly introduce yourself and how you relate to this subject. So over to you, Rob, to begin with.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I've been involved in the Grenfell inquiry since October, I would say, of 2017. I was called in by the Construction Industry Council to look at the problems around fire safety and building management. And as a result of that, I've been involved in the IWFM Life Safety Group since its inception, and also I've been taking part in Working Group 8, where we've been looking at BSM and competencies. So I've been involved, right from the beginning. So yeah, I'm more than happy to pass on my thoughts and experiences from the last 3 years.
Thanks, Rob. Wayne?
Hi, everybody. My name is Wayne Ward. I am a consultant in the built environment. I have been for probably 30 years now. My introduction to this field is when I overclad or I refurbished 17 10-plus story tower blocks in 2000 to 2008, which gave me a background, I suppose, in the technicalities of those works. But ultimately, I've been part of the Life Safety Working Group since its inception as well. But I also worked at BRE for 8 years, developing schemes, third-party accreditation schemes, which gives me, I suppose, a bit of background in how these things are brought to market and how we upskill people to deliver them. I am, I suppose, a technical person. So in terms of my current role, I'm currently doing large-scale delivery of refurbishment of social housing properties, which also includes all of the issues around overcladding or previous overcladding and how we upskill the industry and our business to be able to comply with the Building Safety Bill and make sure that we have all the information in place to deliver those projects. So I'm here to, I suppose, add that knowledge to this webinar, but ultimately I have quite a long background in the technicalities of delivering these works.
Thanks, Wayne. Mark?
Mark Snelling. My background's construction. Before I went into design risk management with the introduction of the CDM regulations, I joined a family property company quite a long while ago now, and through those two connections, I wrote to Armour one day because our managing agent didn't know anything about a particular subject, suggesting I did, and following that ended up as their health, safety and fire advisor. I was appointed because I thought differently to them, which was interesting. They wanted a challenge, and actually that challenge grew into Grenfell, and their whole approach has changed to it. I've been involved in Working Group 8. Armour quite heavily involved in many of the consultations, so I've been involved in those. I have recently become chair of the Association for Project Safety, Building Safety Committee, and been part of the team with Sophie and others looking at the Building Safety Alliance for certification and registration of building safety managers.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you all for joining us today. Before tackling the 4 different areas for discussion, I thought it would be useful to get your perspectives on the following, and that's really, what do you anticipate is the main positive outcome of the competence requirements? Does anyone want to go for that?
Yeah,
Rob.
go on. I believe that the main, well, I'm hoping that the main outcome will be that anyone involved in the construction and management, indeed the whole building cycle. So if we take the design concept, the actual construction and ongoing management, I believe that I'm hoping that people will realise that whatever decisions they make, they become accountable for their actions. So if somebody, say on a construction site, doesn't do their job properly, i.e. they don't fit the cladding or the fire stopping properly, then that has a knock-on effect. And I think that this new legislation and the new competency requirements will actually, I hope, put a stop to that. I'm sure it will, but people need to be accountable for their actions, no matter what part of the design, construction and ongoing management it is, because lives are at stake here if we get it wrong.
Okay, anyone else to add to that?
Yeah, I've got a few things to add. I mean, I've worked on a lot of these the buildings that are in scope for many years through the stock transfer process. When we refurbished them, there was thousands refurbished at that period of time, and throughout that whole process, people's understanding of what varies on site to site, project to project, client to client, and people's understanding of what they need to do to make the building work, to make it safe, is variable, and sometimes it's variable in a way which isn't good for the building or the people that live there. And I think that this whole programme and the requirements for competencies, the requirements for knowledge and understanding, and the requirements to be able to do something about it are the biggest benefit for the scheme. And it's right across the board. Grenfell type situations don't happen by themselves. Yes, whilst it's an accident at the time, when you look into the issues that the building had, right through the design, development, construction, post-occupation process, it's caused by lack of understanding by people and a lack of a level playing field of knowledge that everybody that's been involved in that has had. And it's not an epidemic in terms of people's or the issues with it, but it is embedded in the whole industry, that the issues that are there that caused it, and something needs to be done about it. So there are gaps, and there's gaps that need to be filled by bringing or upskilling people, with the knowledge that they need to have and an understanding of the issues and how they should be solved.
Thanks, Wayne. Mark?
As I say, I came from construction where organisations generally didn't have health and safety and fire advisors, or certainly didn't have fire advisors, and where that's become the norm. And it's been a real source of frustration for me that people managing buildings still think that they can manage health and safety health and safety, fire and risk without any formal training, knowledge, understanding of the subject. Only today a question came in, and I just wish that the industry would wake up to that really important need. This is not something you can just do. You have to know and understand.
Thanks. And I guess the positive thing is that we've had an overwhelming response to this particular webinar. So people are very much wanting to engage with this, and also they are wanting to understand what it is they need to do. So let's hope that we can provide some answers today. So let's focus on some competency questions. And why don't we start with the big one? Is this a new profession? Don't all rush, Mark.
No.
I keep referring back to my days in construction, but I joined with the introduction of the CDM regulations. I thought I'd become a planning supervisor, and that in a way is the direction I think this will go. There will be an organisation representing the building safety manager, like Veris tried to be at the beginning. Whether that constitutes a profession, I'm not entirely sure, but I see it going the same way.
I'm not sure that it is a new profession. I think it's an upskilling, whether that just be knowledge of the general requirements for managing a building. But I don't think it's an entirely new profession per se. But it's something, as Mark has alluded to, there are too many gaps out there. Too many people think that they know how to manage a building, and it's something that we need to ensure that we fill in all the gaps, especially around risk management and how we actually deal with any residual risks that there are undoubtedly going to be some residual risks left in a building, but it's how we manage those and plug that gap.
Okay, that was very Wayne.
Yeah, I was going to say I see it as a new skills and competence accreditation, which there is, a market for currently other skills. So if you look at it, many professions could join this to get that skills accreditation, and I'm assuming that it will be set up in that way. But ultimately, you need to be able to show competence that you understand this building group or the type of buildings that you're working on, because there is a specific set of issues that relate to the management, refurbishment, and operation of these buildings. So it's no different than, say, something like an air conditioning assessor, and they come with a background in mechanical engineering, but or whatever it is as a technician, and they upskill themselves to get an accreditation in the inspection of them. Yes, they have to show skills and competence to do it, but it's effectively a tick box based on knowledge, skills, and competence to deliver works in those areas. So multiple professions or multiple skills could lead into this. You just then become able to work on those buildings once you are accredited.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, my next question is kind of relating to, well, first of all, as the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, I think I'm inclined to agree with Rob that it's not necessarily a new role. But who do you think is likely to do the role? Or put differently, what background would help facilitate taking on the role? It's a bit of a leading question, possibly, but I know there's a difference of opinion potentially. Well,
yeah, if I have a stab at that, I would always go for somebody from the facilities management profession, and that would be somebody that is able to manage a complex building. And the reason I say that is that the overall concept of facilities management, has always been, a holistic approach. So looking at it from above and considering all elements of a building. So you could look at every single asset that is in that building, and from a fire, if we look at it from a pure fire safety point of view, all those assets will combine to promote the fire safety of that building. But it's not just that, it's everything. So you've got, electrical safety, you've got your building envelope, assessing what that's made of, and what's the likelihood or the risk of that catching fire in an extreme situation. So my view is that it's everything, and that would be a property manager stroke facility manager. But okay. I'm probably biased, having been involved with BIFM and now IWFM for getting on for 30 years.
Mm. I think Sophie said to me yesterday when we were talking, I expect you to say there'll be ARMA members. I certainly think it's easier to reverse into this from a facilities background. Although having said that, I sit on the ARMA committee with a number of people from surveying, health, safety and fire backgrounds. And of all the people I've met, they are probably the ones that are best placed to take the role now. They probably have that wider range of skill sets of the property environment, the built environment. So I think you can come at it from a number of different ways. From a normal day-to-day property manager, I think there's a lot of upskilling to be done, certainly in the built environment.
Okay, thanks. Let's have a closer look at that wheel, the competence wheel, and that has been developed by WG8, and everyone here on this webinar has contributed to it in one form or another. As the link on the slide says, the slides will be available afterwards, and you can just go to our building safety hub, and the WG8 framework is on there, and all the information that sits behind that wheel can be found there. But in essence, what we've got is 6 groups of skills, knowledge and experience, and wrapped around that are the behaviours, which may be mentioned last, but will be incredibly important to drive some of that culture change that Dame Judy Tackett was talking about. But if we quickly look at each of these components of the competences that will be required, we're looking at building systems, and that's really buildings, their design, their construction, what are the life safety principles, compartmentation, fire strategy, etc., interactions of systems and components. Then when we look at building operations, people will really be expected to understand the legal framework and duties, what are compliance drivers, and documentation and information sharing will be incredibly important. The golden thread and safety case are elements that are incredibly important moving forward. Risk management is obviously one of the core principles, and everything associated with that people will expect to build on. And then leadership and planning, that's really everything from personnel to business objectives, prevention and protection, really understanding the different roles and responsibilities and really planning your resource. And that's quite an important element, that people can not just fight or meet compliance standards, but can really look more broader at enabling building safety management. Operational practice, then what sits behind there is the engagement and communication, stakeholder management, all the project management, procurement, information and data systems. And then of course, an enormously important element as well is monitoring and control, whether that's monitoring, management review, action tracking and planning, etc., etc. So looking at these competences, what are the best routes moving forward for getting in the BSM role? What do people think? Where does most of the upskilling need to take place? Especially from an FM perspective then. Yes, Wayne?
Yeah, so I've looked at the competencies a lot, because I'm also members of 9 and 10, which are site supervision and project management. And ultimately, you can come from a number of backgrounds into this. I'm not a facilities manager, or certainly by qualification, but I've fallen into some facilities management roles just purely by the number of projects that I've worked on. But I think having an understanding of how buildings operate for the building safety manager and how they're operated is probably one of the key competencies. But the thing with the requirements of the building safety bill is to have an understanding of its construction and things that you wouldn't normally have to know, other than you would have a set of generic plans. Usually you would have some understanding of the building and its current structure, but not the reasons why it's like that. And I think that's one of the gaps in knowledge, certainly for a building safety manager who's come from the FM side. They'll know how it operates and the systems in it, but they might not know the history of how it got there and what things that might have the big change on that or the most effect on that. So that's certainly an upskilling area. But I think, yes, I think you can come at this, into this from a number of routes, whether that's building surveying, facilities management, engineering. But ultimately, you need to get to the stage where you have a bigger or a better understanding of the building operation, but also how the design, construction, and the key components of the building are affected by anything that happens to the building in the future. And I think so that's one of the upskilling areas. But ultimately, if you're coming from an industry that knows that, which I'm a building surveyor, and that's my background, the biggest thing I've noted is understanding the operational and how the residents or the customers of that building use the building, and what effect that also has on I suppose it's that trail of safety from the building's inception to its completion.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
mean, and I think, following on from Wayne, yes, I totally agree that all of that is essential. But one of the gaps, and this is why we've introduced this golden thread, a huge gap will be certainly in older, legacy type of buildings where you've got a lack of information, may not even have the original sort of fire strategy for that building, and I've seen situations in quite complex buildings where the team on site are doing the best that they can given the information that they've got available, but actually you really do need that information, this golden thread, so that you can understand the actual design concept, how that building functions, and what is the correct way to manage that building. Because if you've lost that, you may well not be taking advantage of all the assets and the management systems within, or the operational systems within that building. And I would implore that anyone that's got a building, they need to start gathering this golden thread of information now, because I can tell you it will take a lot of resource, a lot of time and resource to get that information together. If you haven't got it, start making inquiries to try and get it. Go to the client, the owner of that building, and start asking the question, because that's the only way that you're going to effectively be able to manage that building going forward.
And it will also be a regulatory requirement, because as
Absolutely.
the BSM, you will have to be able to demonstrate through that golden thread trail that you are managing the building and mitigating for all the risks. Mark, did you have an angle to bring to this, or?
I was more thinking that the one thing that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is this understanding of property law And I think that influences absolutely everything that we do. Trying to make things work in a leasehold environment is torturous, to say the least. And when I joined Armour pre-Grenfell, everything was impossible. Now things are, at least the will is there, but the constraints of leasehold law, and I think that's to be one of the biggest things, is to understand property law and how this works within it. And the other thing I was just going to touch on golden thread is an understanding of BIM, but building information modeling, and the technology behind that, so that you understand how to extract the data and how to input the data, or at least how to engage with it.
I was actually going to pick up on that just now, because it might be worthwhile reminding ourselves what kind of the three key statutory functions of the BSM are, and they will be managing the building in accordance with the safety case report. So it's not just having all the evidence, but it's then putting that together in a document. It's establishing and operating a mandatory occurrence reporting scheme, and then implementing a resident engagement strategy. So, and this translates, of course, into a number of competence requirements on risk management, relating to being able to manage building information management systems, stakeholder engagements. What do you think are the most difficult expectations around those areas, or the most challenging ones?
Yeah, I'll start with that, because I'm in that process now. So I'm currently refurbishing about 4 blocks, and just getting everything into a format, just in that existing information trail, to understand what the building is and what's happened to it since it's been built. So anything pre-1970 just seems to be a lack of information, that you want. And then any refurbishment that's been done, pre-probably 90s, it's what was done and how did that affect the initial safety case, and putting that in a format that's usable going forward. So we have a property safety team, and ultimately, when I start looking at a building for refurbishment, I go to them and say, can I have all this information? Where's can I have the current fire strategy? Have you got any historical stuff? What's the what works have been done to the building that's affected that? And they just don't have that. And the biggest issue that everybody's going to have with older buildings, which are all the ones that have got the bigger risk, it's all well and good doing a new build, and you can have all that in place in a nice BIM model and the golden thread quite easily running through it. But ultimately, try and do that on any existing building pre-90s is especially if it's been stock transferred, and that stock transfer is not pulled in the information in a format that's readily usable or even found. Just trying to put together that initial safety case will be a massive issue. Even if you're not going to do anything on it, it will be a massive issue. And for councils, housing associations, large property portfolio owners, pension funds, things like that, there's a huge cost in that, and everybody's looking at the cost, because they obviously have to solve all the issues with the buildings whilst they're at it. But it's just getting that knowledge in a format that's usable and can be transferred to develop that initial safety case on older buildings is just nigh on impossible at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to go to Mark. Sorry, Rob, but yeah. I wanted to get your thoughts on the competence expectations around resident engagement, because I know that's something that Armour has been very much involved with. So can you just share your thoughts on that, on what the expectations will be around that?
It all depends what the building safety manager is. The title manager is very pointed. And it's whether they're a doer or a manager, and I think Armour have been pushing very hard that they are a manager, because property managers engage with the residents on a daily basis. It's what they do. They have to do it on leasehold. They have to do it to implement the lease, and in other properties they have to do it to do everything else they do with tenants. But if as has been suggested that they are a doer rather than a manager, then and they have to implement this, there's a whole, you'll end up with 2 parallel schemes, but there'll be a whole communication piece of how you communicate with residents. You'll be part of that. It'll be a very leading part of what you do. I truly hope that they will become a manager and not a doer, because I think it's not the place to use, as when we've put this to MHCLG, we've put it to select committee. It is not the job for a highly skilled built environment professional with risk management skills to be liaising with residents on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, thanks. And I think we've communicated that as well. We've picked that up with MHCLG as well, because we don't necessarily see that this is the person that will be taking all the calls on a regular basis. But it's still important to understand that from a managerial perspective, this will be something that they will need to manage and delegate to the team that they will be working with. On the slide, on the background slide, we mentioned BSI Flex 8670, and that is currently the development of an overarching framework that the BSM has, the publicly available specification, will need to meet. How do you think that the BSI Flex will still influence the final competence requirements for the BSM?
Well, shall I go? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that the BSM is just one role within that is covered within the BSI Flex. But I think that it will cover all roles and responsibilities within the construction and ongoing building management. But I believe that it will be good if if we actually end up with a lot of detail in that standard, which governs, how a BSM, should work, then I think that will be good. I mean, the draft went for it went for a final review yesterday. That was when the consultation ended. So I just hope that what we end up with is somewhere along the lines of that draft that was effectively ended yesterday. So the next few months, or however long it takes, will be interesting. But I believe that will have quite an influence. Also, I think that we're talking of, the building safety bill is around, high-rise, high-risk buildings, but actually the BSI Flex, it covers more buildings, and I am aware that a lot of managing agents and FM type of companies are intending to apply the standard, or this system to all their buildings, because it's just as important in a lower rise building, which, bear in mind, it's not just the height, it's it's the residents that you've got in there. You could have a low rise ground on first floor sort of care home type of environment, and because of maybe a lack of cognitive skills or mobility, that building is still high risk if you had to get everyone out. But that aside, I think it will actually cover, and I think it will encompass, because of it will be industry led, it will encompass lower, say ground first and second type of buildings, and any building.
Yeah, Wayne, that's very clear.
Yeah, and this is where I see the issues lie. So BSI Flex covers anything, pretty much everywhere where people sleep, which is a massive scope for people in industry. And ultimately, the speed that this scheme and I suppose the legislative implementation gets to market will be based on how many people can be trained over a period of time to get accredited to work on these buildings. And the bigger the scope, the less people will be able to do that in a reasonable amount of time. So we started talking about this, 2.5 years ago, and we're probably a year and a half away from any scheme. But if they include everything that's in BSI Flex, we're 3 to 5 years away from scheme, and then we've obviously got to get everybody upskilled to deliver against that scheme in a period of time. So industry needs to be able to deliver that, and if the scheme's so wide, it will take so long for it to get implemented that there's going to be no sort of short to mid-term benefit. That's the main issue I see with it.
Yeah.
Mark, did you?
Yes, our feedback to the consultation was really that it's got a very wide scope, but some of the standards being set are probably inappropriate for those at the top level, and will require a degree for somebody to install a Virgin Internet connection, and that's problematic. Where the scope is so wide for who it applies to, is how do you set a standard that's appropriate for all. I hope they'll make some changes, because it certainly needs the caveats where appropriate.
Well, I guess the positive thing is that part of the reason why they want to go for a wider scope is to make sure that it wasn't just fire and structural that was taken into consideration as part of the competence, because you do need to have that broader awareness around buildings, etc. And the legislation is very much focused on that narrow scope of fire and structural. But we can still continue to influence this moving forward. And also, when it comes to the BSM PAS, we will probably be able to justify where we divert from some of it because of the specific needs of the role, etc. Now, I'm conscious of time that we've already talked about this for a long, so I'm just looking at some of the questions here. And quite a useful one as well is where there's no on-site FM presence, who would fill this role? For example, a visiting FM as the BSM, or would an on-site operations lead, the registered manager, take the role? Who wants to go for that? Mark, go.
I think a lot of it all comes down to whether it's a manager or a doer, and if it's a manager, then it's somebody at a reasonably high level. To be cost effective, it has to be, in my mind, and I've said it before, but it needs to be somebody at a reasonably high level that manages other people, manages the systems, make sure plan, do, check, act is all in place. And yes, they can visit, but I don't know that needs to be their primary role.
Okay, Wayne?
Yeah, in the main, the majority of the buildings, certainly if it's high-rise residential, don't have an on-site presence. And it's not cost effective for them to have an on-site presence. So it would be somebody who's dealing with a group of buildings, I think, in the main. There'll be specific buildings which are very, very large, very tall buildings that may have or may justify an on-site presence, but the majority of them, they don't have an on-site presence. They've never had an on-site presence, and to start requiring an on-site presence would put everybody's service charge up so much that it's going to be a riot. It just wouldn't happen.
Rob?
I envisage that you will have a network of managers, so BSMs, and then they will delegate the responsibilities to a further bigger network of doers, to use Mark's term, who will actually go in and do the actual work. So I can foresee, for example, like a managing agent, having, say, depending on the size of their portfolios, they could have 3 or 4 BSMs within the organisation, and then a whole network of FMs or property managers, actually either on site or actually a mobile type of property manager or FM, actually going around and keeping an eye on these buildings. But it will ultimately be the BSM who is responsible and will carry the can, as it were.
Thanks. And I think that kind of corresponds with, well, all 3 responses correspond with the expectations from MHCLG as well, that they don't necessarily expect someone to be in the building all the time, but that they think that the ratio of BSM per number of buildings will be about 1 to 12. Right, let's go to our next area, certification requirements. What are the requirements to practice in future? And there have been quite a lot of developments recently happening around organisations wanting to take forward certification schemes, etc. So as a brief reminder, the WG8 framework outlines the Wheel of Competence in great detail, and it also contains some recommendations for how these competences should be assessed via professional interviews, a knowledge test, and demonstrating a portfolio. The Ministry, MHCLG, is sponsoring a PAS that will be based on that WG8 competence framework that you can find on our website. And that publicly available specification will then outline what the BSMs should be able to do and how they will be assessed. And that PAS should then actually be referenced by a statutory guidance, which will state that the future BSM will have to demonstrate that they meet all the PAS criteria, and then they will be deemed to comply, and we'll get to that, Mark. So the accountable person, when they are doing their application for a building assurance certificate, will need to demonstrate that the building safety manager is competent and that they've done their due diligence. So what does this mean for people wanting to become a BSM? So you will need to evidence that you meet the criteria by participating in a certification scheme, much like the Gas Safe scheme. So when people then can demonstrate that they meet the assessment criteria, you will receive certification documentation, and then you will be able to go and register. So that's what is really going to be included in this PAS. And because this is something that will need to be driven by industry, because the regulator will not do the function, WG8, the group that has developed the competence scheme, is now looking to collaborate, and the different bodies are bodies such as ourselves, ARMA, scoping what it would mean to deliver a certification scheme like that, and then a register. And that work is being currently scoped under the name of the Building Safety Alliance. So if you hear more of that in the future, then that is what it's looking to achieve. The Alliance will want to deliver a scheme and a register. So one of the questions we receive most often is, will that scheme require formal qualifications? Will you need to have formal qualifications to demonstrate that you are competent? Who wants to go there?
Okay, well, I'll have a stab at this one. I think we are going to need some formal qualifications. Now, whether that's a health and safety qualification combined with some sort of operational qualifications, so that you can demonstrate an understanding of the operation of buildings. That's one possibility, but the route that I would certainly advocate is going down the route of being able to demonstrate experience and competency in a role. So it'd be more of a vocational sort of training. So it's a bit like joining IWFM. To get like a certified role, you need some pieces of paper, but a lot of your the assessment is based on your experience and how long you've been in the sort of FM industry and the types of experiences that you've gone through. So I think that it's probably going to end up being a combination of certificated training and vocational training. And let's face it, if somebody came straight out of university and was put in to manage a building without experience of managing buildings, they're not going to be able to do it. So you're going to have, the skills, knowledge, and experience that is portrayed in the SKEB
model.
Yeah. So
Wayne.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in a number of these developing schemes that do this, third-party assessment and certification, or accreditation, depending what you want to call it. But ultimately, you're going to need a background or some root knowledge, whether that comes from qualifications, and I would expect there to be a minimum requirement by the professional bodies before anybody puts themselves up to get this accreditation, which will say you must have a certain level of background education, and then prove your competence in these fields. And that competence will need to be shown and evidenced, and then you'll be submitted to an assessment that will, I suppose, tease out that knowledge that you have into an examination in some form that will then get you accredited. So, and this is, I suppose, there's not going to be a straight route in. I don't see it. I think every person's going to be different, and the amount of time it will take to become accredited or certified will be different from everybody, depending on what experience that you have. So I think that there's two parts to it. So the organisation or who's going to manage the scheme is going to ask for a specific assessment or they're going to set the specific assessment of competence, and then there are going to be other bodies such as the IWFM who are going to provide training to upskill you so that you're ready to sit that assessment. What that means in reality is that everybody's going to have to do something, whether it's through an APEL route, which is a approved prior experience and learning with a background degree in something, or you could potentially do a year's worth of courses and upskill yourself and to show your competence by that route.
Okay, Mark?
I'm not sure whether you said this, Sophie, but certainly the chair of Working Group 8 has been really pushing all the way through, rather than just having a PAS that says this is what you need to do, but also have a piece sitting on the side that says, and this is how you measure that. Yeah. And I believe that's been accepted and is now going to be part of, it's an annex to the PAS. So
yes, it will be an informative annex. So yeah, you're right. So formal qualification won't necessarily be required for the assessment, but it is what some people might choose to do to upskill where they find themselves having gaps in their competence, and to help people with that and to kind of work towards that assessment of competence. WG8 have got a kind of tool in the report that allows people to explore, do a bit of a self-assessment on where the gaps in the competence are. So if you then want to look for formal or informal training or upskilling, part of the reason why formal qualifications, while they will help people prepare for the assessment, why that will not be a requirement in itself is because we were set the task by MHCLG that we can't really put any barriers in place as well. So if people can demonstrate all the knowledge, skills and experience through length of experience, and if they can demonstrate that through the different assessment methodologies of the certification scheme, then they should be allowed to do that. And a piece of paper with a formal qualification in itself is therefore no guarantee. You really need to be able to demonstrate that you can apply those skills as well and demonstrate that through your experience. And that's why the assessment will very likely take the shape not just of a knowledge test, an essay or something like that. There will also be a professional interview and portfolio interrogation. Okay, right. Moving on to BSMs and existing roles and overlap. how will that newly articulated role of the BSM, and there are still some gaps that the regulator and MHCLG need to give some confirmation on, how will that interact with already existing roles like managing agents, the responsible person on the FSO? Because I know that you've all have dealt with many queries from people on that specific point.
Yeah.
Who'd like to go first?
Right, Sophie.
I can go to, which one would you like?
The one that shows that one.
Yeah, yeah.
This one.
I think one of the biggest issues with it is going to be the building safety bill deals with building safety risk, which is a risk of ultimately multiple deaths, multiple injuries, and the fire safety order won't be disapplied, so that will apply too. So you'll have potentially a strip at the bottom of fire safety that doesn't sit within the fire safety bill, although some people have suggested that isn't right, but certainly leaseholders are going to want to challenge it because of this fundamental issue that at the minute there is a building safety charge and that is not the service charge. So you have separate service charges and separate building safety charges. And when you start looking at these two duties, there is lots of things that has to be done. This is from a leasehold perspective, but it's similar for other buildings. You'll have a lot of things that will need to be managed and charged under the lease, and then things that will be charged and managed under the building safety bill. And if you start to add in health and safety to it, and everybody thinks, oh well, let's just wrap it all in the building safety manager, you'll then potentially have three lots of charges. You'll have a service charge facilitated by the building safety manager, that anything that falls outside of the safety bill. You'll have building safety charge if that stays in, and hopefully it won't. And then you'll have a service charge from the managing agent or the landlord, which isn't going to be desirable. So that's the issue, is that there are things that need to be done as building as usual, and then there's other duties. And when you start looking at them, I haven't got that diagram, there is a huge amount of commonality of things that both people will have to do. And if you charge them separately, you have to separate them.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I mean, I envisage that the managing agent will, in effect, become this sort of a overarching organisational BSM, and then they will have the network of BSMs, and then the BSMs will actually have people on site or visiting site that will actually carry out the work, so the doers. But I believe that that's how it will end up working. It will vary depending on how the property is managed, but I think the landlord or the owner is probably going to will be the accountable person, and they will actually appoint BSM within their managing agent organisation, and so you'll end up with this network. And the reason I say the managing agent, I think it will then be for the managing agent stroke BSM to actually support the network of either senior BSMs and doers with resource and money to be able to fulfill their role. So I think they need the support from the larger parent organisation, as it were, to be able to fulfill their roles effectively.
okay, thank you for
So
that.
is it worth looking at while we were just on that, is it worth looking at that other slide, and which shows
Yes,
why that
sure.
might not be the case?
But we've got some more questions relating to the CDM regs as well that I wanted to pick up on what have just been mentioned. But we'll share the slides afterwards for anyone that's interested, so that you can explore this, and you can get in touch with any of us afterwards via policy@iwfm.org.uk. talking about CDM regs, one of the questions that was asked, why is that not just extended to this? Because surely all of this covers the entire life cycle of a building. And will there be amendments to the CDM regs?
I can answer that question. I couldn't answer the first one. Wayne.
Now, I was going to say, ultimately, the majority of people involved in CDM at the moment are dealing with works, not the operation of the building. And whilst, yes, they could add it to or as an extension to CDM regs, CDM is not set up for the operation, it's set up for planning for the operation, but not the operation. And I think there'd be a fair bit of work involved, and it would be a different person. So you couldn't just say, oh, okay, under CDM, the person who's responsible for CDM then becomes the building safety manager. It just wouldn't work like that. But I think the legislation could potentially change to say, and it is a requirement that all the information is handed to a building safety manager for operation after you've thought about it whilst you're doing work. But ultimately, these buildings out there, they'll never get works done on them. So the CDM wouldn't apply as it currently stands.
Yeah. And
Rob, before Mark.
This sort of follows on. I mean, I saw it was only last night I saw an HSE presentation, and that showed the new gateways that will become part of the building safety bill, and they showed it being the CDM elements will end. I think it was Gateway 3 as they'd shown it, when practical completion is started to be handed over to the owner or the owner's managing agent, and it's at that point where the actual operational team for the ongoing maintenance will actually take over, and then of course they'll apply for the to the regulator for all the certification for that building. But I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, Mark.
I was really answering the general question about CDM regulations. As far as I'm aware, CDM won't change, but what will change for all construction projects to which the CDM regulations apply is that the duty holder under the building regulations will be the duty holder under the CDM regulations. So the duty holders within the building regulations, and that's for all construction projects, will be the same names: client, principal designer, principal contractor, contractor designer, and they will become the duty holder. So they're deemed to comply. So if you're one, you're the other, and then sitting on top of that for high risk buildings, you'll have the gateways, but then all of that will end at Gateway 3 when it moves into the occupational phase. But then of course, all of that applies again if you have any alterations done.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a quick question that kind of relates to that. Will the BSM role have any specific requirements to oversee construction as works proceed, or only post handover?
Oh.
That will have to be the last one.
Go on, Wayne.
Go on, Wayne.
They will have, so if it's an existing building that works are required on, the building safety manager will have a role within that. I think you should have a role within that, because ultimately they need to ensure that everybody who's working on that building is competent to work on that building. So they would become a collector of competence for everybody else doing those works, and I think that it should be their responsibility to ensure that everybody is competent to work on that building, all the way through that project, and collecting the appropriate information on handover. And I think they should set the requirements for how and what information is passed on completion.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got anything to add to any of that? It is the last call for comments.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this has always been one of my sort of frustrations in the FM industry and indeed the construction industry. It would be great if a facilities manager, and let's face it, a good FM is more than likely to become a BSM as we move forward into the future, and it would be great to have that person involved in the concept, the design stage, because I've seen many a design that's that's just been constructed, and then a facilities manager looks at it and says, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? And it's so frustrating that with a bit of input early on, you could have ended up with potentially a better design from an operational point of view. And it's this ongoing operational and maintenance point of view where I think it's essential that an FM stroke BSM gets involved. And at the moment, that doesn't happen. So.
Okay, thanks, Rob, for that. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to draw it to a close here. There's still quite a few answers that people will be waiting for. So what we'll be doing afterwards is tackle all the outstanding questions, and we will publish them together with the webinar because there's really a whole series of very excellent questions that have come in. So thank you all for your participation. So what are the key takeaways from today? And I guess we can summarize that with anyone wanting to do the BSM role will need to be able to demonstrate that they meet the future PAS criteria, and the PAS is scheduled to be finalized by the end of this year. And then people will need to be able to demonstrate that they meet those criteria through a certification scheme. And that is very much likely going to be that the Building Safety Alliance will take that work forward and will continue to feed into that. So lastly, 3 calls for actions really to our audience. If you want to be involved with this work or you want to have more questions answered, then please get in touch with at Policy. And please visit our Building Safety Hub. We've got a new Building Safety Hub, which was published a few months ago on our website, and it really combines all of this information, including references to WG8 report and any other legislation that will be affected. And there you can get information as to how to prepare for this. And lastly, as a wider call to action as well, we have got a market outlook survey in field, and if you want to contribute to what the FM market is going through at the moment, you can participate in that survey in the resources section on our website. And that really leaves me to thank our guests. Thank you very much, Rob, Wayne and Mark, for coming today and for doing the job afterwards, answering all of those questions. And thank you very much for our audience as well in bearing with us 2 minutes past the hour. Apologies for that. Looking forward to see you in the future. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.